This story is titled, My Parents Expected Me to Pay Off My Spoiled Sister's Debt, but I said no and cut them off. Hi everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and makes sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey guys, so this is one of those posts where you just kind of need to vent, because I don't even know where to start. Family drama is exhausting, and mine is next level lately. I'm Theo, 30 male, and if you ask anyone who knows me, they'll tell you I've been on my own since I was 18, paid for my own college, worked my butt off, and never asked my parents. But apparently, that doesn't mean I get to live my life in peace. Nope, it just means I'm the family problem solver by default. It all started when my mom called me out of nowhere. Now, my mom, Lorraine, doesn't call for a chat. She's not the kind of mom who calls to ask how your day is or what you had for lunch. If she calls, it's because something's wrong, and she needs me to fix it. So, when her name popped up, I already knew this wasn't going to be good. I answered, and she jumped straight into the awkward small talk, which isn't her thing at all. Hey Theo, how's work? Still doing finance stuff? She asked like she hasn't ignored my job description for the last decade. I played along because I was curious. Yeah, Mom, still doing finance. What's up? That's when she dropped it. Your sister is in trouble. Now, I wish I could say I was surprised, but I wasn't. My sister, Savannah, 27F, has a long history of creating chaos and expecting everyone else to clean it up. Over the years, her messes haven't just been minor inconveniences. They've been full-blown disasters that always seem to land on my shoulders. Take the time she borrowed my car without asking, only to crash it while texting. She called me in a panic, sobbing about how she didn't know what to do. And like an idiot, I dropped everything to help her out. I dealt with the insurance, paid the deductible, and even let her off the hook for the damage she caused because she swore she'd never do anything like that again. But she did. Or the time she convinced me to co-sign for her first apartment because she just needed a little help to get started. 3 months later, she stopped paying rent, ghosted the landlord, and left me with the fallout. I spent months fighting to fix my credit, while she conveniently moved back in with our parents, acting like it wasn't a big deal. It's not just that she screws up, it's that she never faces the consequences. Every time she messes up, someone, usually me, has to step in to fix it while she plays the victim. And the worst part? She doesn't even show a hint of gratitude. It's like she thinks the world owes her a safety net. So, when my mom called me about Savannah being in trouble, I didn't feel panic or concern. I felt tired. Tired of being dragged into her messes. Tired of being the one who always pays the price for her recklessness. Honestly, I was more surprised it had taken this long for something big to happen. I sighed, already dreading what I was about to hear. What kind of trouble? I asked. I wasn't asking because I wanted to help. I was asking because I wanted to know just how bad this one was going to be. Then she hit me with it. Savannah had racked up $43,500 in debt. 40 grand. I had to repeat it in my head just to process it. How does someone even get to that point? Apparently, she'd been spending money she didn't have, again. But this time, it wasn't just credit card companies she owed. She'd borrowed money from some shady people, the kind you don't just ignore when the bills pile up. And now, they were coming after her. And my mom's brilliant solution to this mess? Mr. Obviously. Because why wouldn't it be? In her mind, I was the one with the steady job, the responsible sibling, the guy who could always be counted on to fix the unfixable. It didn't matter that Savannah screwed up. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that I wasn't rushing in to save her. You need to help her, she said, like my role as the family ATM had already been decided. I sat there for a second, letting it sink in. I asked, help how, exactly? You've done so well for yourself, Theo. You can pay it off for her, she said, as casually as if she were asking me to swing by and grab takeout. I actually let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, I didn't borrow that money. Why should this be my responsibility? I'm not paying anything. The silence that followed was heavy, like she was processing the fact that I'd just outright refused. Then she snapped, launching straight into full-blown guilt mode. She's your sister. Family helps each other. Do you want her to get hurt? Is that what you want? Her words came fast, almost frantic, like she couldn't believe I wasn't immediately jumping in to save Savannah. It wasn't a request. It was an accusation, as if my refusal was the real problem here, not the choices Savannah had made. I took a deep breath, trying not to lose it. Mom, I've helped her before, multiple times, and what does she do? Blow it all on designer bags, fancy vacations, and God knows what else. She doesn't take responsibility for anything because you and Dad have always bailed her out. I'm not doing it this time, but apparently, that logic didn't register. Savannah's struggling, Theo, she shot back. She's not like you. She's not strong enough to handle this. Struggling? I repeated. She's reckless. She spends money she doesn't have, and now she's in deep with some shady people. And instead of dealing with it herself, she's expecting me to swoop in and clean up her mess. Again. She's your sister, Mom snapped. Family looks out for each other. No, Mom. Family doesn't take advantage of each other, I said, my voice firm. This isn't me turning my back on Savannah. This is me refusing to enable her bad decisions. She needs to grow up and face the consequences for once. Mom wasn't having it. Do you want her to get hurt, Theo? Do you want that on your conscience? Look, I'm not heartless. I don't want anything bad to happen to Savannah, but let's be real here. She's an adult. A 27-year-old adult who knew what she was getting into when she borrowed that money. I told my mom exactly that, but she wasn't having it. She's not as strong as you, Theo, she snapped. You've always had it together, and she hasn't. You can afford to help her. It's the least you can do after all we've done for you. I said, done for me? Like what? Making me pay rent the minute I turned 18? Refusing to help with my college tuition? Yeah, thanks for all that support, Mom. She went silent for a second, but then she came back swinging. If you don't help, we'll have no choice but to cut you off. Do you want that? I couldn't help but laugh. Cut me off from what? You don't support me. I've been on my own for over a decade. Your threats don't work on me. And with that, I hung up. After that day, they were all silent, and I wish I could tell you that was the end of it. But it was just the beginning. And the silence didn't last long. I guess I underestimated just how determined my mom could be when she wanted something. After I shut her and my dad down, they shifted gears. If the direct approach wasn't going to work, they were going to guilt me into submission. And when I say they went all out, I mean all out. It started with the texts. Simple at first. Messages like, I just don't understand how you can let this happen to your sister. Then, as the days went by, they got more dramatic. Do you know the kind of people Savannah is dealing with? They're dangerous, Theo. I can't sleep at night worrying about her. I ignored them at first because, honestly, I didn't have the energy to deal with the manipulation. But they didn't stop. Instead, Mom stepped it up with the voice messages. And let me tell you, she's got this talent for sounding like she's holding back tears, even when she's not. Theo, she said in one, Savannah might not make it out of this if you don't help. I don't think I can live with myself if something happens to her. It was like a masterclass in guilt tripping. If they gave out awards for this kind of thing, she'd be a 3-time champion by now. Then my dad, Marshall, decided to jump in. He's usually more of a silent player in these family dramas. But not this time. He left me a voicemail that started out calm enough. Hey Theo, just calling to check in. But then of course it shifted. Look, I know your mom can come on a bit strong, but this is serious. Savannah's in deep, and we can't fix this without you. You've always been the strong one, the dependable one. Don't let us down now. That line, the dependable one, man, it set me off. I've spent my whole life being the dependable one, and all it's ever gotten me is more responsibility and less appreciation. Dependable doesn't mean I'm a doormat, though apparently they missed the memo. But the guilt avalanche didn't stop there. They decided to bring in reinforcements. The extended family. Out of God knows where, I started hearing from my Uncle Greg, who I hadn't spoken to in years. He called me out of nowhere, acting like we were best friends. Hey Theo, long time, no talk. How's life? I knew immediately why he was calling, but I let him ramble for a bit before he got to the point. You know, family's important, he said, in that overly earnest tone people use when they're about to say something they know you won't like. And Savannah's she's struggling. We all go through rough patches, and sometimes we need a little help. Greg, listen, I interrupted. Did my mom put you up to this? He laughed nervously, like I'd caught him. Well, she might have mentioned it. I didn't even let him finish. Look, I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm not paying Savannah's debt. It's not my responsibility. You'd think that would have been the end of it, but nope. The next day, it was my Aunt Deborah, then my cousin Emily. They all had the same script. Savannah's in trouble. She needs help, and I'm the only one who can save her. I don't understand why all of them are that concerned about Savannah. It's not like she's some helpless kid who made an honest mistake. She's a grown adult who spends money like it's Monopoly cash and then acts shocked when the bill comes due. What made it worse was that none of them even tried to understand my side. When I explained that I wasn't willing to throw away $43,500 for someone else's mistakes, they acted like I was speaking another language. But she's your sister, they'd say, like that was supposed to magically change my mind. The worst part, though, was the smear campaign. My mom, in her infinite wisdom, decided that if guilt-tripping me directly wasn't working, she'd try to turn the rest of the family against me. She started telling everyone on the family group chat, which I left from it since long ago, that I was self-absorbed, ungrateful, and a total piece of shit. According to her, I had forgotten where I came from and was too wrapped up in my fancy city life to care about my family. I found out about this when my cousin Ryan called me. He's one of the few family members I actually get along with, and he gave me the heads up. Dude, he said, Lorraine's been talking mad crap about you. She told Aunt Deborah that you said Savannah deserves whatever happens to her. I was furious. Not because I care what Deborah thinks, but because my mom was straight up lying about me to make herself look like the victim. I told Ryan the truth, that I never said anything like that, and he believed me. Yeah, I figured she was exaggerating, he said. It's just messy, man. Messy didn't even begin to cover it. But the real drama hit when Savannah decided to jump into the chaos herself. Up until then, she'd been quiet. Not a single text or call. I thought maybe she was embarrassed for once. Turns out she was just waiting to strike. And when she did, it wasn't subtle. She texted me one night, and it wasn't a plea. It was an accusation. I can't believe how selfish you're being, Theo. You know I'm in serious trouble, and you're just sitting there doing nothing. You're supposed to be my brother. Selfish? That was laughable coming from her. Savannah's entire life had been one big string of bad decisions, always with someone else cleaning up her mess. I didn't respond. Honestly, I didn't think it deserved one. The next morning, she upped the ante. You have the money. Stop acting like it's such a big deal. Just pay it off, and I'll pay you back when I can. Like that was somehow a reasonable solution. Like I was the unreasonable one for not handing over the $44,000 to fix her screw-up. Again, I didn't bother to respond. That, of course, didn't go over well. She went full meltdown mode, sending me these long, rambling texts about how I was abandoning her, and how I'd never understand what it's like to struggle. And then, just to twist the knife, she threw in, Mom and Dad always said you'd come around eventually. Guess they were wrong. That line hit different, not because it made me rethink anything, but because it confirmed what I'd always known. This wasn't just Savannah being reckless. My parents had been hyping her up, making her think I'd always be there to fix her mess. By that point, I was over it. I stopped replying to texts, ignored the calls, and just focused on my own life. Just when I thought they couldn't sink any lower, the guilt trips, the ambushes, the smear campaigns, I realized I'd underestimated just how far they were willing to go. My parents and Savannah had played every card in their deck, or so I thought. Turns out there was one last card hidden up their sleeve, and this one shattered any line I thought they wouldn't cross. I got a call from my bank, and just like that, everything turned into complete chaos. The bank's fraud department informed me about suspicious activity on my account. Apparently, someone had attempted to access it using forged documentation that didn't match their records. They had tried to change my contact details and withdraw funds, but the system flagged the attempt as suspicious and froze it. While the bank couldn't disclose specific details, they hinted that the documentation suggested it was someone close to me. Someone close to me. I didn't need to ask about it. I already knew. Savannah. Who else could it be? The timing was way too convenient. She had just texted me about how desperate she was. And when I didn't cave, this happened. I was boiling inside. Forging documents to access my account? That's not just desperate. That's criminal. I couldn't let this slide. That evening, I drove straight to Savannah's apartment, my anger barely contained. Without a call, of course, because I was done playing nice. She opened the door. What are you doing here? She snapped. You tried to steal from me, I said, cutting straight to the point. Her expression shifted for a split second before she folded her arms. I don't know what you're talking about. The audacity, though. I told her, don't even try that, Savannah. The bank flagged your little stunt. They told me someone forged documents to access my account. Do you even realize how serious that is? She let out an exaggerated sigh, as if I was being overly dramatic. Oh, relax, Theo. It's not like I actually got anything. I blinked, stunned at how casually she brushed it off. Relax? Are you seriously trying to defend this by saying you failed? You tried to commit fraud, Savannah. That's a crime. She shrugged, completely unbothered. What else was I supposed to do? You left me no choice. You refused to help me when I needed it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No choice? Savannah, you had every choice. You could have owned up to your mistakes, taken responsibility, and figured out how to fix this yourself. But instead, you thought stealing from me was the solution? She scowled. Don't act all high and mighty. Mom and Dad said you'd never let me struggle. They told me you'd come around eventually if I pushed hard enough. I just had to wait for you to get over your little tantrum. I stood there, stunned. Little tantrum? That wasn't frustration boiling in my chest. It was rage. This wasn't just her being reckless. This was years of my parents coddling her, feeding her delusions, and treating me like I existed solely to clean up her messes. Unbelievable, I muttered. more to myself than to her. Do you even understand what you've done, Savannah? You crossed a line. A big one. She rolled her eyes, doubling down instead of backing off. I'm not the villain here, Theo. You are. You've turned your back on family. If you'd just helped me in the first place, none of this would have happened. That was it. The final straw. I took a deep breath, not because I wanted to stay calm, but because I needed to make sure I didn't say something I'd regret later. I'm done, I said, turning toward the door. But before I left, I looked back at her one last time. If you ever try something like this again, I won't just cut you off. I'll make sure the cops know exactly what you did. Grow up, Savannah. You're not a child anymore. I didn't wait for her response. I headed back to my car, my mind racing. How did it get this bad? How had my family gotten so toxic that my own sister thought it was okay to steal from me and blame me for it? I knew this was it. There was no coming back from this. I had to cut ties for good. But I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. My parents weren't going to let this go. Savannah wasn't going to let this go. And if they thought I was just going to roll over and take it, they were dead wrong. And I was right. The next day, my mom called. I didn't pick up, but she left a voicemail. Theo, your sister told me what happened, she said. I can't believe you threatened her like that. She's struggling. And instead of helping her, you're making things worse. You should be ashamed of yourself. I played the message 3 times, just to make sure I heard her right. Savannah tried to steal from me, and somehow I was the bad guy? It was so ridiculous. I didn't respond. What was the point? They weren't going to see reason, but that didn't mean I was just going to let it slide. I called my bank and asked them to tighten the security on my account. Password changes, 2-factor authentication, the works. I wasn't about to give Savannah, or anyone else, another chance to mess with my finances. For a few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. But if there's one thing I've learned about my parents, it's that they don't take no for an answer. At least not the first 100 times you say it. Don't tell me in the comments that I could just say no, because they do not understand it. So, when I came home from work a few days later and found their car parked in my driveway, I wasn't exactly shocked. Annoyed? Sure. Shocked? Not at all. I took a deep breath, parked behind them, and sat in my car for a minute, mentally preparing myself. I knew they weren't here for a friendly chat. They weren't here to apologize or try to make amends. No, this was going to be another round of guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail. And honestly, I was already exhausted just thinking about it. When I finally stepped out of my car, my mom was standing by the front door, looking like she was about to deliver some kind of lecture. My dad was staring at the ground like he'd rather be anywhere else. My mom said the moment I got close enough, we need to talk. I don't think we do, Mom. I think everything that needs to be said has already been said. She ignored me, of course. This nonsense has gone on long enough. We're your parents. Savannah is your sister. This isn't how families behave. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, fully expecting her to follow me in. And of course she did, with Dad trailing behind her like a lost puppy. You're just going to walk away while we're talking to you? Mom snapped. No, I'm going inside my house so I don't have to stand outside listening to more of your nonsense, I replied. If you're going to lecture me, you might as well do it where I'm comfortable. She didn't appreciate my tone, but honestly, I didn't care. She'd already crossed every boundary I'd tried to set, so why bother pretending I was okay with this? My mom wasted no time jumping into her usual spiel. Theo, you need to stop this stubbornness. Savannah is struggling, and it's your responsibility as her brother to help her. She's family. Yeah, family. I totally get it. So I said, let me tell you something about family, Mom. Family doesn't lie, steal, and manipulate to get what they want. Family doesn't expect one person to sacrifice everything while someone else coasts through life without consequences. So don't come in here lecturing me about family. My dad finally spoke up. This isn't about taking sides, Theo. It's about fixing things. You're the only one who can do that. I laughed bitterly. Fix things? You mean like paying off Savannah's debt? Covering for her fraud attempt? Letting her get away with everything like she always does? Yeah, no thanks. I'm done fixing things for her. She's your sister, Mom said, her voice rising. Do you know what it would do to her if something happened? How would you live with yourself? And how do you live with yourselves? I shot back. You've spent her entire life enabling her, making excuses for her, and throwing me under the bus whenever it's convenient. You created this problem, not me. So don't you dare try to make me feel guilty for not cleaning up your mess. Mom's face turned red. I thought she might actually explode. She said, if you're not going to help, then we'll have no choice but to cut ties with you. No holidays, no family gatherings, nothing. I stared at her, trying to decide if she really thought that was a threat. Mom, I've been on my own my whole life. You cutting me off is like firing someone who already quit. She opened her mouth to argue, but Dad cut her off. Lorraine, stop. This isn't helping. He turned to me, his expression softer. Theo, We just want what's best for everyone. Savannah's made mistakes, sure, but she's still family. Can't you just meet us halfway? I couldn't bear it anymore. Do you even hear yourselves? You're asking me to shell out $43,500 for someone else's mistakes. How is that halfway? What is Savannah contributing to this so-called compromise? I could feel the rage boiling in my chest, my thoughts racing faster than I could speak. Every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd stepped up when they wouldn't, every single instance of them putting Savannah first, all of it slammed into me at once. I pushed off the counter, my movements deliberate, and walked to the door. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. No yelling, no arguing. They didn't deserve that much energy from me anymore. I swung the door open wide and said, "Get out." My mom blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "I said get out," I repeated. "This conversation is over. You're not going to guilt me into paying Savannah's debt, and you're not going to manipulate me into feeling bad about it. So unless you have something productive to say, you can leave." Mom looked like she wanted to argue, but Dad gently took her arm. "Come on, Lorraine, let's go." She glared at me as she walked past, her voice dripping with venom. "You'll regret this, Theo. Mark my words." I shut the door behind them and stood there. It was quiet. Finally quiet. But the quiet didn't last long. The whole situation had been gnawing at me, and against my better judgment, I decided to find out what was going on with Savannah. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to know how far things had spiraled. I reached out to a mutual friend who still kept in touch with her, hoping they'd fill in the blanks. "What's going on with Savannah?" I asked. "I haven't heard anything since, well, you know." The friend didn't hesitate. "Oh, you haven't heard? It's bad. The people she owes money to aren't messing around. They trashed her car, completely destroyed it. Windows, tires, everything. She's freaking out, saying she doesn't feel safe." I should have felt something, pity, concern, something, but all I felt was exhaustion. She'd gotten herself into this mess, and now she was reaping the consequences. Of course, I knew this would only mean one thing: more pressure from my parents to step in and save her. A few days passed, and still no direct contact from Savannah or my parents, just silence. It felt strange, like the calm before a storm. And sure enough, the storm came. A letter from a lawyer. When I opened it, I couldn't believe what I was reading. My parents were threatening legal action, claiming I had a moral obligation to support my family. They wanted me to pay Savannah's debt, and they were actually willing to take me to court over it. I couldn't believe it. After everything they'd already done, they were willing to go this far? Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but mostly I just felt numb. This wasn't a family anymore. It was a battleground, and I was done fighting. Or, what baffled me is the sheer audacity of it all. It was almost impressive. Look how silly it sounds, my own parents, threatening legal action because I wouldn't clean up Savannah's $43,500 mess. It was like they'd thrown out any remaining pretense of being a family and replaced it with outright hostility. I didn't need to think twice about what to do next. The first call I made was to my lawyer, who, thankfully, has a good sense of humor. When I explained the situation, he chuckled and said, "Theo, they don't have a leg to stand on. Let them file if they want. It'll get laughed out of court." Sure enough, nothing came of their threat, but it was a reminder of how toxic they were, and it only reinforced my decision to go no contact. They had burned every bridge, and there was no coming back from that. Knowing they were willing to go that far was enough for me. I realized I couldn't keep this door open anymore, not even a crack. I'd been holding out some tiny shred of hope that maybe, somehow, we could fix things. But this was the last straw. I blocked my parents' numbers that same day. No calls, no texts, no voicemails. I went through my social media and blocked them there too. While I was at it, I did the same for Savannah. If they were going to treat me like an enemy, then I'd treat them like strangers. I also had to tell the extended family what had happened. I knew my parents would spin the story to make me look like the villain, and I wasn't about to let them get away with it. So I called up my cousin Ryan, one of the few family members I actually trust, and laid everything out. "Dude," Ryan said after I finished explaining, "that's insane? They seriously tried to sue you?" "Not yet," I said, "but they're threatening to. I wanted to give you the heads up because I'm sure they're going to start spreading lies about me." "Don't worry," Ryan said. "I've got your back. And honestly, good for you for cutting them off. They sound toxic as hell." That conversation gave me the confidence to reach out to a few other relatives. Some were supportive, like Ryan, but others, not so much. My Aunt Deborah, for example, was firmly Team Lorraine. "Theo, they're your parents," she said, as if that somehow excused everything they'd done. "You can't just walk away from them?" "Yes, I can," I said firmly. "And I have. They've crossed every line imaginable, and I'm not going to let them keep dragging me down." I knew Deborah thought that I am a kind of disappointment. Shay said, "Family is family, Theo. You'll regret this someday." "Maybe," I said, even though I didn't believe it. "But for now, I'm choosing peace." And peace was exactly what I got. Only for a few days, though. Because, of course, about a week after I blocked them, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Theo," came my mom's voice, sharp and accusatory. "You blocked me." I sighed, already regretting my decision to pick up. "Yes, Mom. I blocked you." "Why would you do that?" she demanded, as if the answer wasn't glaringly obvious. "Because I'm done," I said. "I'm done with the manipulation, the guilt trips, the lies, the demands. I'm done with all of it." She scoffed. "You're being ridiculous. Do you really think you can just cut us out of your life like this?" "Yes," I said simply. "I can, and I have." She tried to argue, of course. She called me selfish, ungrateful, heartless, the usual. But I didn't take the bait. I just calmly repeated that I wasn't interested in continuing this conversation, and hung up. Then I blocked the number. After that, I doubled down on the no-contact plan. I told Ryan to let me know if my parents or Savannah tried to reach me through him, but otherwise I didn't want to hear anything about them, and for the most part, he respected that. Every now and then, though, he'd slip in an update. Months passed, and the longer I stayed no contact, the more I realized how much I'd been missing out on. Without the constant drama, I had so much more time and energy to focus on the things that actually mattered. Of course, there were still moments of doubt. Every now and then, I'd hear a voice in the back of my head saying, "What if they're right? What if you are being selfish?" But then I'd remind myself of everything they'd done, everything I'd endured, and the doubt would fade. Up until now, I didn't know what happened to Savannah. Recently, I got another call from Ryan. "Hey, just thought you'd want to know. Savannah filed for bankruptcy." I paused for a moment, letting the news sink in. "Well," I said finally, "maybe now she'll learn to take responsibility for her actions." "Maybe," Ryan said, though we both knew it was unlikely. Savannah wasn't exactly the learn-from-your-mistakes type. As for my parents, they kept up their smear campaign for a while, but eventually it seemed to fizzle out. I guess even their most loyal supporters got tired of hearing the same story over and over again. By the time the holidays rolled around, I felt some kind of relief, because I knew I wouldn't have to spend Christmas pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Instead, I spent the holidays with friends, my chosen family, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. I could just be myself, without the constant weight of my parents' expectations or Savannah's demands dragging me down. Cutting them off wasn't easy. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. But looking back, I know it was the right one. Sometimes you have to walk away from toxic people, even if they're family. And while it's not always easy, it's worth it. I still get the occasional update from Ryan, though I've made it clear I don't want to hear much. Last I heard, my parents were still trying to rebuild their reputation, and Savannah was struggling to find her footing after the conviction. I wish I could say I felt bad for them, but I don't. They made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. As for me, I refuse to be a fool dancing on the strings held by all of those big shots. I'm moving forward, and I've surrounded myself with people who actually care about me and respect my boundaries. I'm focusing on my career, my hobbies, and my happiness. And while I don't know what the future holds, I know one thing for sure. I'll never let anyone, family or not, drag me down again. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. If you've got toxic people in your life, I hope my story gives you the courage to stand up for yourself. You deserve better. We all do.
Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The unsuspecting wife didn't know her husband was craftier than she was, and this is what came of it. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. The difficulties began on October 15th, 2010, at 7:30 a.m. I was at Wilcox Airfield waiting for my flight to Nassau when two men in ill-fitting suits approached me. They stopped in front of me, and I looked up from my iPad at their two impassive faces. "Mr. Kavanaugh, would you like to come with us?" asked one of them politely. "You're welcome," he added. "Who are you, and what do you need from me?" I asked. "I'm Special Agent Washington, and this is Special Agent Brown." "We're from the FBI," the second man replied. "Can I see your ID?" I asked. They pulled out their laminated badges, and the photos matched. Since I had no idea what a real FBI badge looked like, I took their word for it. "I'm afraid we're here to arrest you," Washington said. "You are charged with insider trading by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Will you come with us, please?" I stood up and followed them down the hallway and through a door into a room with a table and 4 chairs. They informed me of my rights and put on handcuffs. Really? I thought. They're going to march me through the airport in handcuffs for insider trading? It turned out that this was only half true. They let me take my jacket to hide the handcuffs from prying eyes. They took my iPad, transported me to their headquarters, and put me in another room with only 3 chairs. 30 minutes later, Agents Washington and Brown came in and sat down. They read out a list of charges. According to them, I was involved in a hacking scheme to obtain corporate press releases before they were published and was part of a group that made over $100 million from our activities. They wanted to ask me some questions. Sorry, agents, I said. I intend to remain silent and would like to speak with a lawyer. They tried to convince me that it would be in my best interest to answer their questions, but I stood my ground. These agents were not my friends, and I intended not to answer any of their questions. They took me to a table and allowed me to use the phone. I asked for a telephone directory because I didn't know any lawyers. They gave me the directory, and I looked through the impressive list. I didn't have the slightest idea who to choose, so I picked a beautiful ad at random. A man answered the phone, and I told him I needed a lawyer. He asked me about the nature of the matter, and I told him what was happening. He switched my call, and a woman answered. "Hello, this is Tyler Atkins," she said. "How can I help you, Mr. Kavanaugh?" I repeated my story, and she told me to be quiet and that she would be there in an hour. They brought me back to my room, and I calmed down. After 50 minutes, the door opened, and one of the most stunning women I have ever seen walked into the room. She must have been about 6 feet tall, with flaming red hair, the face of a model, and clear, creamy redhead skin. Her eyes were an icy blue, and her legs seemed endless in that skirt. Damn, she was great. She introduced herself and shook my hand. Her fingers were long, slender, and cool, and her handshake was firm. I guessed she was around 40, but it turned out I was mistaken by 7 years. She sat down in a chair and read the list of charges. She looked at me. "Mr. Kavanaugh, you have a big problem," she said. "Did you do it? Does it matter?" I asked. "For the purposes of my representation, no," she said. "For me personally, yes, it makes a big difference." "Well, I didn't do it," I told her. "I have never hacked a computer. I don't know how to do it. I have not participated in any schemes, and I have never received press releases before they were released publicly. I would not engage in any insider trading if I could, and I am completely innocent of these charges." She looked at me doubtfully, her eyes piercing my soul. "Okay," she said. "We will act on these allegations. If I find out later that you lied to me, it won't be nice, you know." "Great," I said. "Let's see how we can get you out of here. Is there someone you need to talk to?" "My wife," I said. "I'd like to talk to the kids too, but that can wait until I get out of here." "Let's see what I can do," she said. She left, and I didn't see anyone for 3 hours. I was about to pee on the floor when Agent Brown walked in with Miss Atkins. "I arranged bail for you," she said. "You will have to surrender your passport, and you should know that all your bank accounts are frozen." "How about my money? Will my credit cards work?" I asked. She raised an eyebrow at Brown, who cleared his throat. "They're frozen too," he said. "You won't be able to use them." "Will I get my wallet back?" I asked. "Yes, all your personal items will be returned," she said, "except for your iPad." "I'm afraid that one is now evidence," she said. "Then the money is okay, and I'm ready to go." "Well, as soon as Agent Brown points me to the toilet, I'll be ready," I said. They gave me an envelope with my things, and I went out with her. "Come see me tomorrow at 10 in the morning," she said, handing me her business card and calling us a taxi. "Want to use my phone to call my wife?" she asked. I called home, but the answering machine picked up. I left a short message saying my trip was canceled and that I would be home in an hour. I then gave her the phone back. The taxi arrived, and I went home. When I arrived, no one was home, so I prepared something to eat. It was difficult to concentrate, but I managed. I needed to call the kids, find out where Kelly was, and figure out a few things. Daniel and Patricia weren't home either, so I left them messages asking them to call me back. After I ate, I called my boss, John Sinclair. He told me that I was fired and that my personal belongings were packed and sent home. I had lost my trader's license, and he was sure I would never work in the industry again. Moreover, he was looking forward to seeing me receive a long prison sentence. Well, that wasn't good. I was now unemployed and facing criminal charges. Kelly didn't come home that night, and when I called her, the phone went to voicemail. I didn't know if she heard my message or what she heard, but apparently, she left me. Now I was thinking about the children. What did they hear? If Kelly heard, I'm sure she told them. The next morning, I attended a meeting with Miss Atkins. She said that we had a lot of paperwork to do, and it wouldn't be quick. Mr. Kavanaugh, how are you going to pay for my services? She asked. If I am acquitted, it will not be a problem, I replied. It might be in your best interest for this to happen, she said, laughing. I liked hearing her laugh and decided that I would try to make her laugh more often. We have a big day ahead of us, she said. Let's start. What do you think happened, and how are you going to help me prove your innocence? I asked for a list of names of people involved in the case. She said they hadn't done a preliminary investigation yet, so she didn't really have any details. This would happen as soon as she could meet with the FBI and the SEC. I'm afraid I have no idea until I know exactly what happened, I told her. Once I have a clear idea, we will get to work. We discussed a few more issues, and I signed a mountain of paperwork. When we ran out of ink and free signature lines, I went home. I had a dozen messages on my answering machine, surprisingly from Kelly and the kids. They had problems, they were stuck in Boston, and their credit cards weren't working. Well, nothing surprising there. She had some money with her, but it wouldn't last long, and she needed my help. Strange, but the children were with her. Their messages were the same, but neither of them attempted to explain why they were in Boston. The situation was increasingly strange. I had only been home for 5 minutes when the phone rang. It was Kelly. Hi, Selden, she sounded upset. Listen, dear, I don't have much time. We're stuck at the airport, and I need my credit cards to work. Could you call the bank and find out what's wrong? I'm afraid it won't do any good, I replied. Kelly, I've been arrested and charged with insider trading. The cards you have won't work. Is there any way you could send me money? She asked. Approximately how much do you need? I asked. Just enough to buy tickets home, she said. I'll see what I can do, I replied. All our bank accounts are frozen. Okay, honey, she said. Please hurry. Thanks for the help. This was the weirdest conversation I've ever had. Again, there was no explanation as to why she and the children were in Boston. No questions about the arrest, nothing. She should have been shocked by every word I said, but there was nothing like that. Perhaps it was due to the lack of time she mentioned. I would answer all questions when she returned. Some time ago, I had rented a warehouse space. I went there and opened the safe in the cedar chest that my mother had left me. I took enough cash to last me until this was all over. I sent money for tickets to Kelly and the kids and drank whiskey to calm my nerves. I sat and thought until I went to sleep, then lay awake for a long time, thoughts spinning in my head. The next morning, I was woken up by the phone ringing. It was someone from Miss Atkins' office. She had conducted a preliminary investigation, and now all the information on the case was available. She invited a computer expert to discuss the information with us, and I was scheduled to show up at 10 a.m. I showered and got ready, then took a taxi to her office. Her computer expert turned out to be a very attractive young woman named Lainey. The trail was pretty cold, and while I'm not a computer expert myself, I do know my way around a computer. Between her and me, we were able to discover enough to start understanding what was going on. It turned out that most of the transactions were carried out when I was not at home. I was in another country on the day of several of the transactions, and I saw how Miss Atkins began to believe in me. Mr. Kavanaugh, who knows your passwords? She asked. Kelly knows the password to my computer, I said. The IT people at work know my work passwords, as do my bosses. They don't know the password for my home computer. Does Kelly know your work passwords? She asked. I shook my head. No, I don't give them to anyone, not even her. It was obvious that someone, presumably with Kelly's consent, was trying to set me up. But why? Where could Kelly get this information? I had press release files on my computer containing information that would be extremely valuable to investors, but the dates on the files were usually a week before the press releases. This meant that anyone with access to my computer could use this information to make trades before the public knew the news. Most press releases passed through the desk of my boss, John Sinclair, but his deals would be scrutinized. If he had made trades based on these press releases before they were published, he would have quickly been accused of insider trading. So, he apparently funneled information to Kelly so she could make trades without arousing suspicion. But why use my computer? Then I realized it was to set me up. John must have used my computer at work when I was away from my desk. When they showed up on routine checks, it triggered a search on my home computer, completing the setup. I met Kelly 2 years ago at a company party while accompanying my boss, John Sinclair. I was confused because John was married, and not to Kelly. John saw my confusion and immediately gave an explanation. His wife, Lucille, was not feeling well, so he asked Kelly, a family friend, to come to her place. I had no reason not to believe him, and Kelly seemed like a very charming woman. As the evening went on, she seemed to spend more time with me than with John. He even asked me if I would mind taking Kelly home so he could go back to Lucille, and I readily agreed. Kelly explained that she was divorced with 2 children, Daniel, 18, and Patricia, 16, who were spending the weekend with their father. We soon began to meet regularly. I was surprised that we rarely saw her children, and when we did, they were quite hostile toward me. After a whirlwind romance, I proposed to Kelly and was delighted when she accepted. But I was again surprised that Daniel and Patricia did not attend the wedding. "Oh, they're still upset about the divorce," Kelly said. This surprised me. We had been dating for almost a year, and I assumed she had been divorced long before that. I pushed it out of my thoughts for a while and enjoyed the wedding reception. When I got back to the bar, I went looking for Kelly and found her on the dance floor with John. They were dancing too closely for a bride and her guest, so I set down their drinks and walked over to intervene. They both hesitated for a moment, as if I was intruding, but they quickly separated. I took my bride in my arms and danced the next few dances with her. Back at our table, I mentioned to Kelly that she and John had walked too close to the line of what was acceptable for a bride at a wedding. Kelly laughed. "Oh, don't be stupid," she said. "John is just an old family friend. You have nothing to worry about." She made it seem so reasonable, but I noticed that Kelly and John were almost avoiding each other for the rest of the evening. We left the reception and went on our honeymoon. We settled into a more or less normal household routine. Daniel and Patricia were another matter. They didn't even try to act like we were in a relationship, and Kelly just shrugged. "I've finally accepted that this is the way it is and that hopefully it will improve over time," she said. A few weeks later, I came home from work to find Daniel and Patricia sitting in the living room. After receiving only a grunt from them in response to my greeting, I asked, "Is your mother at home?" Silence. I said, "Is your mom home?" I repeated. Daniel remained silent, but Patricia spoke up. "She's upstairs taking a shower," she said. I stood there for a minute, then decided that enough of this nonsense was enough. "Listen," I said, "you clearly don't like me very much, and I guess that's not uncommon in second marriages. But you seem to hate me, and if we're going to be any kind of family, you're going to have to put up with it." The silence continued. Then Patricia spoke. "We hate you," she said, "and always will, because you destroyed our family." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Your mother was already divorced when I met her," I said. "No," Daniel finally spoke. "She filed for divorce only 2 months after you started dating. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks before your wedding." I stood there dumbfounded. I literally had no words. "Guys, I'm sorry, but you have to believe me. Your mom told me she was divorced. I would never date a married woman." "Yet," Daniel said, "that's not what she said." "And who should we believe, our mother or the man who destroyed our family?" They both stood up and left the room, Patricia running out in tears. Well, I thought. I went upstairs to the master bathroom and pulled back the shower curtain. "Oh, Kelly," she laughed, "aren't you overdressed to join me?" "It's not funny, Kelly," I said, barely able to contain myself. "The kids just told me you were married when we started dating." "Of course, dear. I told you about this, but we were divorced." "You didn't say anything like that to me. You told me you were divorced." "I would never date a married woman, even if she was divorced." "Whatever. We are together now, and that's the main thing. So how about you take these things off and join me in washing my back and front?" I was still excited, but what could I say? I'm just a man, and I'm weak, and she's hot. I shed my clothes in record time and jumped into the shower. But the events of that day would stay with me for a long time. Often, when I had a free moment, I thought about what was happening, but usually, I didn't have time to dwell on it. Until one evening, when I was left alone at home for the whole evening. I sat in my office with a glass of wine in hand, and two thoughts became clear in my mind. One of the things some people I know have said when discussing guys who date women who cheat on their husbands is, if she cheats with you, she will cheat on you. While I didn't see any obvious signs of Kelly cheating, she had plenty of opportunities, like that night at the bachelorette party. Another thought was about her dancing with John at our wedding. At the time, it seemed more or less innocent, but now I wasn't so sure. Then I remembered how we met when she was at a party on John's arm because Lucy was sick. It was a stretch, but it was all I had at that moment. I decided to take the next day off from the office and called Lucy to see if we could meet for coffee. She was puzzled to say the least, but agreed, and we met at a local Starbucks. We exchanged a friendly hug and a kiss on the cheek, grabbed coffee, and sat down. I was stuck, not knowing how to start a conversation, but Lucy took the bull by the horns. "Okay, Selden," she said, "you asked for this meeting, so what's bothering you?" I took a deep breath and let it out. "Lucy," I began, "do you remember March 2 years ago when we had that job that you couldn't come to?" "Well," she said, "that's not entirely true. I could have come, but John told me it was for employees only, no spouses." That was a hammer blow between the eyes. "What happened, Selden?" she asked. "You look like your best friend died." "Perhaps you are not so far from the truth, Lucy. You know my wife, Kelly." "Of course, yes. I was at your wedding. Remember? She was a wonderful bride." Yes, she was." "Do you know how we met?" Lucy shook her head in denial. "She was at the same party. She was on John's arm. He told me she was there because you were sick. I think we both know now that he was lying." I didn't tell her about my suspicions that Kelly and John might have something else going on. I felt like a complete jerk for not telling her, but I didn't want her to confront him until I had all my cards stacked. I made a copy of Pagonia and cloned Kelly's phone, so I now had access to all her calls and texts. It didn't take me long to confirm their romance, but it was other things that made me shiver. "Hi John, it's Kelly." "Hey, baby." "What's the news?" said John. "Everything is set on my end. Selden thinks I'm going to a party with the girls, and I've got everything set up with Angela to cover for me. Can you get away from the old chain?" "No problem," he said. I told her I was taking some clients from out of town for the evening and it would be very boring, just business. "I still can't believe how easy it was for me to lure you in." "Are you serious?" Kelly asked. "What normal man could resist you?" John said. "God knows you couldn't." If I hadn't already been in a state of bewilderment, the next part of their conversation certainly would have done so. "Did you make the trades I told you to make?" he asked. "Yes, of course," she said. "But I still don't understand why you want me to use Selden's computer." There was a pause. I could imagine him rolling his eyes. "Because when we make our move, we'll need a scapegoat to take the blame." "Selden?" she said. "Yes, Selden," he said. "He'll probably be able to get out of this if he's really lucky, but by the time they figure it out, we'll be long gone." "Have you told the kids yet?" "Not yet, but that shouldn't be a problem. They hate him for ruining our family. When I explain that we're taking his ill-gotten gains and going to live big on a Caribbean island, I don't think they'll be too upset." Okay, but be careful. Kids can react strangely when they have to leave friends and stuff behind. Don't worry, I can handle them. Okay, it's your choice. At the usual time and place? Yes. Goodbye. Goodbye, Kelly. I turned off the recording and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. Damn, what a confusing mess. As much as I suspected their affair, hearing it discussed so openly and coldly and learning that our relationship was a lie shook me to the core. I knew we hadn't known each other that long, but I loved her with all my heart and thought she felt the same about me. Now there was something bigger at play, something illegal that they were trying to frame me for. I didn't know what to do, but I definitely needed more information. If she was involved in such a scheme, she would have to hide the money somewhere, but where? I installed spyware on both my computers, home and work. Almost immediately, I hit the mark. John used early press releases for insider trades and had Kelly execute them from my home computer. Sometimes, he made trades from my work computer. I didn't understand why they used both computers. Perhaps it was to maximize the chances of me getting caught. I wasn't sure if that was their original intention, but it was obvious they were setting me up and using this as a distraction while they made off with their ill-gotten gains. Even more depressing was listening to her conversations with Daniel and Patricia. I knew they hated me because Kelly convinced them that I was to blame for the destruction of her marriage. Forget that, even if it was true, she was the one who cheated on their father. And as I now understand, she had already cheated on him with John. They were very excited when she told them that John had uncovered my insider trading scheme. That's great, Daniel said. We can turn him over to the police and get him out of our lives. Maybe you and Daddy can get back together? No, kids, she said. I'm afraid that ship has already sailed. Besides, John and I have another plan. We're going to steal his loot and then let the police catch him. That means we'll have to leave the country for a while, but we will live on a beautiful island in the Caribbean. What about school and our friends? We'll figure something out. Don't worry, we'll have a lot of money. Maybe you can invite your friends on vacation, and once your stepfather is in jail, we can come back. I couldn't tell if the kids really believed it, but there were no more objections. Further tracking revealed that they were transferring funds to a Swiss bank account. Thanks to the spyware, I now had access to this account. I wasn't sure what exactly would happen, but I decided that I would need a ready source of cash. I started making irregular cash withdrawals from my checking and savings accounts, not large enough to attract attention and not always the same amounts. Once I had enough, I hid them in a safe I had in a storage room. I bought a new laptop. When I found out they were going to make their move, I logged into her account and transferred the money to another bank in Barbados. I kept transferring it until it ended up in a bank in the Cayman Islands. Right after I left for the airport, I knew that Kelly and the kids were heading to Bice. John stayed behind. They didn't say why, but I guessed it was to complete my setup. Meeting Kelly and the kids at the airport was another surreal experience. Kelly rushed over and put her arm around my neck, while Daniel and Patricia stood there with the strangest expressions on their faces. Since I spoke to her while she was stuck in Bice, she had never expressed surprise or concern about my legal problems. Oh, Selden, she said. Thank you very much. I didn't know what to do. I had no money, and the credit cards weren't working. Yes, Kelly, I said. I understand all this, but what were you doing in Bice? We didn't talk about any trips. And why didn't you have return tickets? After all, you probably bought round-trip tickets. Oh, honey, let's not talk about it now. I just want to go home and relax. We all got into my car and headed home. Okay, Kelly, I understand, I said. Little did she know how well I understood everything. We hadn't been home 15 minutes before she called John. Oh, John, she cried. It was terrible. I went to the bank just like you said, and there was no money. What do you mean there wasn't? Exactly what I said. The account was closed and the money was transferred to a bank in Barbados. When I called the bank, they didn't tell me anything because I didn't have the right access codes. You didn't do anything, did you, John? Of course not, he said. Why would I do that? I don't know, she said. but you better hope I don't find out you did it." She hung up. Things turned out even better than I had planned. I sowed the seeds of mistrust between them, which could only help my plans. Kelly came back into the room looking innocent and worried, even though I almost believed her. "So tell me, Selden," she said. "What is this story about the arrest and insider trading?" "I wish I knew, Kelly," I said. "I was at the airport waiting for a flight to Nassau when 2 FBI agents approached me and arrested me." "But for what?" "It looks like they found some early press releases on my computer with deals based on information from them. I have no idea why they checked my computer in the first place, let alone how the information ended up there." "You did it?" she asked. "What?" "Of course not, Kelly. You know me better." "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have asked. So how did the information end up on your computer?" "This is where things get interesting," I said. "Most of the computer activity happened while I was out of town." Kelly was a little taken aback by this, but quickly recovered. "So how do you think it ended up there?" "Well," I said, "that's the $64,000 question, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" "I think it's obvious. Do you have any idea how this could have happened?" "Of course not, Selden," she said. "Where would I get this kind of information, let alone know what to do with it?" "Okay, Kelly, I believe you," I said. "We'll just have to wait for the investigators to finish their work." "Yes, of course," she replied. I believe you only as much as I can throw at you." Her eyes darted nervously, and I could smell the fear. As I left the room, pulling my phone out of my pocket, I almost immediately received a signal that she was making a call. It did not surprise me that it was John Sinclair. John, she said as soon as he answered. "Selden knows." "I don't know how he knew, but he knows." "Calm down, Kelly," he said. "There's no way he could know anything. If he knew, he would have already called the police on us." "You're probably right," she said, "but something strange is happening." "And where did the money go?" "If you didn't take it and I didn't take it, then who?" "I wish I knew, Kelly. I wish I knew." My next meeting with Miss Atkins was quite interesting. She met with the prosecutors, and although they agreed that the evidence seemed to exonerate me, they still weren't sure I wasn't somehow involved. This was not entirely unreasonable, given that the trades were carried out on my computer. Things were further complicated by my growing attraction to Miss Atkins. I obviously thought she was beautiful at first sight, but as we worked together on my case, her pure intimacy overwhelmed my senses. She had the personality and intelligence to match. She gently rebuffed all of my attempts to go beyond a professional relationship, and when I persisted, she reminded me that I was her client and it was unethical for her to enter into a personal relationship with me. I tried to argue that this would only make her work harder for me, but she just laughed and shook her head. I didn't know how I would do it, but I was determined to win against this woman. Kelly was brought in for questioning, and I learned through the grapevine that she was still trying to pin the blame on me. Then she came to me in tears. "Selden, please, you must know that I am innocent. I would never try to set you up. I love you." I barely had the strength not to laugh in her face. "I know, Kelly. I know. Do not worry, everything will be fine. Is there some way that someone else could be on my computer? Was there someone in the house? I don't know if she cheated on me in her home, but I couldn't figure out why not." "No, Selden," she said. "Of course not." God, how I felt like a villain, but it was so right. She definitely deserved everything that happened to her. Maybe it was the children, they always hated me, blaming me for ruining your marriage. Kelly was so shocked that it took her several minutes to respond. "This is absurd, Selden," she said. "Even if they hate you as much as you say, where could they get such information?" "Well, if it wasn't them and no one else was here, then it had to be." Kelly covered her mouth and ran out of the room. The police continued to bring Kelly in for questioning, but they simply had no evidence other than that the transactions were made on my computer. There was no evidence that she made them. When investigators discovered that all the press releases had passed through John's desk, he was also called in for questioning. But he refused to answer questions. An anonymous call tipped them off to his relationship with Kelly, and a search of phone records confirmed it. Her one-way trip to Bice and bank records confirmed their fate. It didn't take them long to get Kelly to cooperate with John. Their trials were almost a formality. The evidence was overwhelming, with Kelly's admission to her role in the scheme. Kelly threw herself at my feet. "Please, Selden," she said. "You must believe me. I never wanted to do this. I was forced. Give me peace." "Kelly," I said, "I know everything. I know you cheated on your first husband with John, and you and John were together when you seduced me. I'm not sure if you planned to use me in your scheme from the very beginning, but that doesn't matter anymore. It's over, Kelly. And it looks like Daniel and Patricia will get their wish to be with their father, although not with you. I don't think you'll have a problem getting custody when their mother is a convicted felon." Kelly simply burst into tears when the bailiffs came to take her away. Since neither she nor John were willing or able to return the money, they were not eligible for a reduced sentence. She will have to serve 5 years, and John will have to serve 10. The children never wanted to talk to me before leaving with their father. They still blamed me for the destruction of their family, and I think they blamed me for Kelly's arrest as well. Tyler was able to get my arrest annulled and my trader's license reinstated. Even though I had no intention of returning to my old company, Tyler invited me out for drinks to celebrate our victory, and I was only too happy to accept. After our drinks were served, I got right down to business. "So, are we done? Case closed?" "Yes," she said. "You are free." "Great," I said. "You're fired." She almost choked on her drink. "What? Why?" "Well, you told me about some ethical rules about dating clients." "Yes, I have such rules, but I don't understand how." Suddenly, a spark of understanding lit up in her eyes. "I must be the stupidest woman on the planet," she said, "especially for a lawyer. I just didn't realize it until now. Now that you've figured it out, what do you think? Do we have a chance?" "There's always a chance," I said. "I just honestly didn't think of you that way," she replied. "I feel the same," I said. "But we did not meet under other circumstances. We met as attorney and client, and you were accused of a serious crime." "But I was innocent," I protested. "I don't want to get into the legal stuff," she said. "The police decided they didn't have enough evidence to pursue charges against you. Plus, they had more evidence against John and Kelly. It's not quite the same as being innocent. To quote Dickens, the law is in 5th place." I smiled as Tyler laughed her charming laugh. "This isn't the first time I've heard this, and I'm not saying it's not true, but that's the way it is. You still haven't answered my question. Will you go on a date with me?" "You're persistent," she said. "Okay, I'll go with you, but I'll tell you in advance that things won't go any further until we've had some very serious conversations. My inner sensor tells me that you still haven't told me the whole story, and I'll get it out of you one way or another." My ears perked up at this. What did she know or think she knew? "You may well try," I said. "I'm sure you can be very persuasive." She just gave me a knowing smile and a wink as we agreed to dinner on Friday and parted with a warm handshake and a kiss on the cheek. When Friday evening arrived and we had dinner, the conversation was pleasant, but there was tension throughout the evening. Tyler had her suspicions about me, and I was worried about hers. I received a much warmer kiss goodbye, but that was all. Our second and third dates were more passionate, but there was still a barrier between us. I was torn. I knew I was in love with Tyler, and I believed she loved me too, but she couldn't give herself completely to me while I had part of myself from her. I was afraid that if I opened up to her, I might lose her. We continued to meet regularly, but there was always an elephant in the room. In our conversations, sometimes I felt like I was being cross-examined. This seriously complicated our relationship. Tyler refused to deepen it because she wasn't sure of me and believed that trust was critical to any relationship. Given my experience with Kelly, I could understand her concerns, but I could never muster the strength to fully open up to her. It all came to a head as we made out on her couch. Things were about to get very hot when she slammed on the brakes for the umpteenth time. But this time, everything was different. "Selden," she said, "I can't go on like this." "What, do you want to break up with me?" I don't want this, Selden. I'm really falling in love with you, but I just can't be with someone I can't trust. Why? What did I do to make you not trust me? Come on, Selden, she said. You can't be that naive. You clearly know more about your business than you've told anyone. This anonymous call was too convenient, not to mention the missing money. I found myself between a rock and a hard place. If I don't confess, our relationship will probably end, but if I tell her everything, we might still break up, and I don't know what kind of legal trouble I might get into. I took a deep breath and decided to tell her the truth. One thing was for sure, I didn't want to lose her, and that was my only hope. Okay, Tyler, I'll tell you everything and hope and pray that you'll want to be with me. Tyler looked a little shocked, probably thinking I was going to tell her. She then nodded for me to continue. I told her how we met, the children's reactions to our marriage, and finally, my conversation with Lucille that revealed John and Kelly's lies. I then told her about the phone cloning, confirming the scam, and how I found out about their insider trading scheme. I didn't even have to tell her about moving the money and making the call, it was obvious to her. I bowed my head, putting my face in my hands, completely exhausted and not knowing if these would be my last moments here. When I looked up, Tyler was very calm. She seemed lost in thought. I can't say I didn't suspect something like this, she said, but it's still a little shocking to hear it straight from you. I nodded in understanding. I hear you, I said. But what about us now? I can't say right now. I need time to digest all this. I think you should go now. I'll call you when I'm ready. I hesitated for a moment but realized that my best hope was to respect her wishes. I stood up, kissed the top of her head, and left. The next few days were the worst of my life. I both longed for and dreaded her call. I also wondered if the police would come to my home. The following Friday, the phone rang. Tyler's name was on the display. I answered the phone nervously. Hey, Tyler, I said anxiously. Hey, Selden. I've made some decisions. Can you come over for dinner tonight around 7? Then we can talk. Sure, Tyler. Whatever you say. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up feeling somewhat relieved that she wanted to talk and didn't just tell me to disappear. I rang her doorbell, and she greeted me with a sweet kiss on the lips before I followed her into the kitchen. I didn't know how much appetite I'd have or if I'd be able to hold down food, but I went to the refrigerator for a can of Pepsi and sat down at the table when she shooed me away from the stove. We had a pleasant dinner with casual conversation. Luckily, it was a very light meal. I don't think I could handle anything heavy. After dinner, she let me help with the dishes. Then we went into the living room and sat on opposite ends of the couch. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I didn't want to rush her, and she obviously needed time to collect her thoughts. Selden, she began, I can't say I'm not disappointed that you didn't tell me all this when I took your case. I was your lawyer, you could and should have trusted me. I'm also offended that you continued to hide it when we started dating. But having said that, I sympathize with your feelings of betrayal that have made it difficult for you to open up, even to me. I also appreciate that you eventually confessed, even if I had to push you a little. She smiled at me slightly. Ultimately, my decision was quite simple. I love you, Selden, and I know that you love me. I have one condition before we continue our relationship. I hope I'm not sticking my neck out too far, but I'll do anything for you, Tyler, I said. I thought you would say that. Don't worry, I don't think you'll have a problem with it. So, what is it? I asked, the tension palpable. It's money, Selden. I don't feel comfortable holding this money. What can we do about it? There aren't many ways to find out who it really belongs to, I said. Actually, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I think I've found the answer. What is it? Tyler asked. Money certainly doesn't do any good where it is now, I said. That was an interesting choice of words, Selden, she replied, because I was thinking about doing something good with it. Do you have anything specific in mind? I'm open to almost anything you want to do. As you know, both my parents died of cancer. I'd like to donate it to cancer research. That's a great idea, Tyler. I will begin making the necessary arrangements tomorrow morning. Tyler came over to me, sat on my lap, and kissed me deeply. I began to seriously hope that everything would be fine. "So, where do we go from here?" I asked. "I suggest you take me to bed," she said. I was stunned. "Get your thoughts out of the ditch, Selden. I just want to fall asleep in your arms." "Oh, sure," I mumbled as she laughed at my reaction. We went upstairs, and she let me use the bathroom first, giving me a spare toothbrush. I used the toilet, washed my face, brushed my teeth, and was done in 10 minutes. When she came out of the bathroom, I was already lying in bed, wrapped in sheets. I just lay there with my hands behind my head, amazed at how my life had changed. Tyler soon emerged from the bathroom dressed in a skimpy nightgown. I couldn't even tell if there was anything underneath it. She climbed into bed and snuggled up to my side, placing her head on my chest and her hand on my stomach. I hugged her, pulled her closer, and kissed her forehead. "I love you so much, Tyler," I said. "I still can't believe you could love me," she replied. "You better believe it. I wouldn't have gone through all this if I hadn't been in love," she said. She turned off the light, and although it was still early, we soon fell asleep. The next day, I began transferring money back from the Cayman Islands and making anonymous donations to various cancer research and treatment organizations. Each donation was large enough to be appreciated and useful, but not so large that it attracted unwanted attention. There was one last piece left in the puzzle that had been my life for the past couple of years. Tyler and I were sitting in the living room having our afternoon drinks when there was a gentle knock on the front door. I stood up to answer and was shocked to see Daniel and Patricia standing there, looking very nervous. "Can I come in?" Daniel asked. "Of course," I said, puzzled. I motioned for them to come in and close the door. They followed me into the living room, and Tyler stood up. "Tyler, these are my adopted children, Daniel and Patricia," I said. Startled, Tyler shook their hands. "Please," she said, "take a seat. Can I get you a drink?" Daniel looked at Patricia, who shook her head no. "I don't think we'll stay that long," he said. "Okay," I said. "Why are you here?" "We came to apologize," Daniel said. "Apologize for what?" I asked, my surprise evident. Patricia continued, "We visited our mother yesterday. She said, 'I'm sure it's been hard for you, but what does that have to do with me?' She told us the truth about your relationship," Daniel said. "She told us that she was divorced." "It was more than that," Patricia added. "She also admitted that she had already cheated on her father with John Sinclair." "Well," I said, "I really appreciate you coming to tell me this. I'm sure this whole situation has been very difficult for you." They both nodded. "Can I ask you something?" I said. They looked at me and nodded. "I understand your feelings towards me, especially considering what you were told. But even if it were true, your mother was not without guilt. Were you old enough to choose? Why did you stay with her and not with your father?" I asked. Daniel just smiled sadly. "These were more of her lies," he said. "She tried to blame the scam on him. He worked too many hours, traveled a lot, and neglected her, the usual excuses. She conveniently left out the fact that she was a housewife with expensive tastes, and he had to work hard to support her lifestyle." I just shook my head as they stood up to leave. I shook hands with Daniel and briefly hugged Patricia. "I have to say again that I appreciate you telling me all of this. It shows real character. If I ever need anything." "Thank you, but that's really not necessary," Daniel said. "Our father is in control. We have a lot of work to do to repair our relationship, but I think we will succeed." I walked them to the door, then sat back down with Tyler. "Ugh," I said. "That was really unexpected." "Yeah," Tyler said. "They seem like good kids." "Yeah," I said. "It's like bad news and good news. The bad news is that Kelly ruined our marriage and my relationship with my 2 good kids. And the good news? The good news is that it led me to you," I said, pushing her gently and kissing her passionately. Our tongues immediately intertwined in a duel. Before we got too far, Tyler stood up, pulling me with her. "I think it would be more convenient somewhere else," she said, leading me to the bedroom. Not being a fool, I wasted no time following her. What do you think of our short story? I thought my husband did the absolute right thing by recording the conversation on his phone. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. See you in the comments.
I inherited a $5 million farmhouse from my late father. My greedy husband and mother-in-law stormed into the farmhouse and presented fake documents claiming ownership of the property. When I refused to accept the documents, they tied me to a tree with rope and burned my father's farmhouse. I was crying while they laughed and left me there alone. But after 2 hours, I gave them a horrific surprise they never expected. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how betrayal almost broke me but ultimately made me stronger. It all began the day my father passed away. He was my rock, my guide, and my source of unconditional love. Losing him left a gaping hole in my heart. But even in death, he left me a precious gift, the farmhouse. The farmhouse wasn't just any property. It was a $5 million estate nestled in the countryside, surrounded by rolling hills and trees that whispered secrets from generations past. My father used to say it was more than a home. It was a symbol of everything he'd worked hard for. He often reminded me, "This place is yours, Sarah. When I'm gone, make it your sanctuary." After his death, I decided to move into the farmhouse, hoping it would help me feel closer to him. It did. I spent my days walking through the fields, touching the walls of the home he built with his own hands, and reliving the memories of us sitting on the porch, talking about life. It was peaceful, until that evening when my life changed forever. I still remember the knock on the door. When I opened it, there stood my husband, Daniel, and his mother, Martha. They hadn't visited me at the farmhouse before, which immediately felt odd. Daniel, my husband of 5 years, had always been distant. He worked as a corporate manager in the city, constantly buried in his job. And Martha, well, she was a retired school teacher who never hid her disdain for me. She often reminded me that Daniel had married beneath himself. Over time, I learned to tune her out. But that evening, something was different. Their expressions were cold, their energy unsettling. "Sarah," Daniel said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." "What's going on?" I asked, watching Martha follow him with a smirk that made my stomach churn. Daniel pulled out a stack of papers and placed them on the kitchen table. "These are legal documents. Your father signed this property over to me and Mom before he died." I blinked, unable to process his words. "What are you talking about? That's not possible. My father would never." "He did," Martha interrupted, her voice sharp. "He wanted us to have this place. He knew you couldn't handle it alone." I felt my chest tighten as I picked up the papers. They looked official, with seals and signatures. But I knew my father better than anyone. He wouldn't have given away something so meaningful without telling me. "This is fake," I said firmly, pushing the papers back toward them. "I'm not signing anything. This property is mine." Daniel's jaw clenched, and his tone turned icy. "You don't know what you're talking about. These documents are legally binding." I stood my ground. "Then prove it in court. Until then, get out of my house." Martha's smirk disappeared, replaced by a scowl. "You ungrateful little," she began, but Daniel stopped her. "Fine," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But you'll regret this." As they stormed out, slamming the door behind them, I felt a pang of fear creep into my chest. Something about the way Daniel looked at me, cold and calculating, made me uneasy. But I pushed it aside. I thought their threats were empty words. I was wrong. A few days later, I returned home from a walk in the woods to find Daniel and Martha waiting for me in the driveway. This time, their anger was palpable. "We gave you a chance, Sarah," Daniel said, stepping closer. "Now you're forcing us to take matters into our own hands." I froze. "What are you talking about?" Before I could react, Martha grabbed my arm while Daniel pulled out a rope. Panic surged through me as they dragged me toward the large oak tree near the edge of the property. I screamed, but there was no one around to hear me. "You brought this on yourself," Martha sneered as they tied me tightly to the tree. "What are you doing?" I cried, my voice trembling. "Let me go." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he lit a match. My eyes widened in horror as I realized his intention. "No," I screamed, struggling against the ropes. "Stop, please." The farmhouse, my sanctuary, went up in flames. I could only watch as the fire consumed everything my father had built. The smell of smoke and the crackling of wood filled the air, but the pain in my chest was worse. This wasn't just a home, it was the last connection I had to my father. And they were destroying it. When the fire raged high enough to light up the night sky, Daniel and Martha walked away, leaving me tied to the tree. "Enjoy the show," Martha said with a cruel laugh before disappearing into the darkness. For a moment, I thought it was the end. But then something inside me shifted. Fear turned into resolve. Betrayal burned in my veins like fuel, igniting a fire of my own. I wasn't going to let them win. The moment Daniel and Martha disappeared into the darkness, leaving me bound to that tree, I knew I had two choices: surrender to despair or fight for my life. The flames from the burning farmhouse roared in front of me, licking the night sky. The smoke was thick, making it hard to breathe. The farmhouse wasn't just a building, it was everything my father had worked for. Watching it collapse was like losing him all over again. But I couldn't let it end like this. Not tied to a tree, defeated. My hands were bound tightly, the rope biting into my wrists. I twisted and pulled, ignoring the pain, determined to free myself. The firelight flickered across the property, casting eerie shadows. I focused on a jagged piece of bark sticking out of the tree. Gritting my teeth, I rubbed the rope against it, over and over, until my arms felt like lead. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, the rope began to fray. With one final pull, it snapped and I was free. My hands were raw and bleeding, but I didn't care. I stumbled forward, coughing and gasping for air. The fire was relentless, but I couldn't stop staring at it. My father's legacy was gone, reduced to ash by the people who were supposed to be my family. But as I stood there, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was angry, furious. I clenched my fists, vowing that I wouldn't let Daniel and Martha get away with this. They thought they'd won, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. The first thing I did was call the police. It felt surreal describing what had happened. My husband and his mother tied me to a tree and burned my house down. I told the officer on the phone. The disbelief in his voice was palpable, but I didn't care. "Send someone," I insisted. "I can prove everything." While I waited for the authorities, I began surveying the damage. The farmhouse was completely destroyed, nothing but blackened rubble. The heat from the fire still radiated, and the smell of smoke clung to the air. But then I spotted something that gave me hope. Near the edge of the property, the security camera I'd installed months ago still stood. Its casing was melted, but the memory card inside looked intact. When the police arrived, I handed over the memory card. "This might have footage of them," I explained. The officers took it, promising to investigate. But I could tell they weren't convinced. Their skepticism was like a slap in the face, but I refused to let it deter me. After they left, I sat in my car trying to figure out my next move. My father had always told me, when life knocks you down, get back up stronger. His words echoed in my mind, giving me the strength I needed to keep going. If the police weren't going to take this seriously, I would build a case on my own. The first step was to prove that the documents Daniel and Martha used were fake. I went to a lawyer my father had trusted, Mr. Callahan. He was an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Sarah," he said after I explained everything, "this is serious. If those documents are fraudulent, we can prove it. But it'll take time." "I don't care how long it takes," I replied. "I need justice for my father." Mr. Callahan nodded. "Then let's get to work." Over the next few days, we dug into the documents Daniel had presented. It didn't take long to find glaring inconsistencies. The signatures didn't match my father's, and the dates were suspiciously close to his death. It was clear to me that Daniel and Martha had orchestrated this scheme, hoping I wouldn't fight back. But I wasn't stopping there. I started talking to neighbors and local workers who might have seen or heard something that night. To my relief, a few people remembered seeing Daniel and Martha's car parked near the property. One neighbor even mentioned hearing loud voices and a woman scream. Their testimonies added more weight to my case. Meanwhile, I retrieved the security footage from the memory card. Watching it made my stomach churn. There they were, Daniel and Martha, dragging me to the tree and setting the farmhouse on fire. Seeing their faces twisted with malice was like reliving the nightmare all over again. But instead of breaking me, it fueled my determination. Every step of the way, I felt my resolve hardening. Daniel and Martha had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, someone they could intimidate and silence. But they didn't realize that their betrayal had awakened a part of me I didn't know existed, a part that refused to back down. I began piecing everything together, the fake documents, the security footage, the witness testimonies. It was like assembling a puzzle, and with each new piece, I felt more confident. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about honoring my father's memory and making sure his legacy wasn't tarnished by greed and deceit. But even as I prepared for the battle ahead, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. What if the court didn't believe me? What if Daniel and Martha found a way to manipulate the system? I pushed those thoughts aside. You're stronger than this, I told myself. You've already survived the worst. Now it's time to fight back. The day after I compiled all my evidence, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but I could hear the venom beneath it. "Sarah," he said, "let's put this behind us. If you drop everything, we'll leave you alone. No harm done." I gripped the phone tightly, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You set my house on fire, Daniel. You tried to destroy everything my father left me. Do you really think I'd let you walk away?" He chuckled. "Suit yourself. Just remember, you started this." I hung up, my hands shaking. His threat was clear, but it didn't scare me. If anything, it solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to stop until Daniel and Martha paid for what they'd done. After Daniel's threatening phone call, I knew there was no turning back. The fear that once lingered in the pit of my stomach had transformed into determination. This was about more than the farmhouse. It was about standing up to the betrayal that had been thrust upon me and reclaiming the dignity my father had instilled in me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I worked closely with Mr. Callahan, my lawyer, who became my unwavering ally in the fight. Together, we refined the evidence I had gathered, ensuring every piece was as solid as a brick wall. The fake documents were the centerpiece of the case, and Mr. Callahan had them analyzed by a forensic document examiner. The results confirmed what I already knew. The signatures were forged, and the dates were manipulated. This alone could convict them of fraud, Mr. Callahan told me one afternoon as we sat in his cluttered office. But with everything else you've gathered, Sarah, they don't stand a chance. I nodded, clutching my cup of coffee tightly. They need to pay for what they did, not just for me, but for my father. He gave me a reassuring look. We'll make sure of that. The security footage was another crucial piece of evidence. Watching it was excruciating, but I knew it was necessary. It captured everything. The way Daniel and Martha tied me to the tree, the fire they started, and the cold, calculated expressions on their faces. Seeing it reminded me of the terror I felt that night, but it also reignited my anger. I handed the footage over to the police, who began their investigation in earnest. As the case gained traction, I started to feel a glimmer of hope. Witnesses from the neighborhood came forward to corroborate my story, strengthening the narrative that Daniel and Martha had orchestrated this vile act. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, recalled seeing smoke and the silhouette of two people leaving the property. Another neighbor remembered hearing voices arguing earlier in the evening. Their testimonies were the threads that tied the whole story together. But even as I built my case, I faced moments of doubt. Daniel and Martha were cunning, and I couldn't shake the fear that they might find a way to manipulate the system. My nights were restless, haunted by visions of the fire and the betrayal that had turned my life upside down. Every morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, reminding myself that this wasn't just for me, It was for my father's memory. The court date finally arrived. Standing in the courtroom, I felt a mix of emotions: anxiety, anger, and a fierce determination to see this through. Daniel and Martha sat on the other side of the room, their faces impassive. Daniel looked calm, almost smug, while Martha occasionally whispered to him. Their confidence only fueled my resolve. The prosecutor began laying out the evidence piece by piece. The forged documents were presented first, and the forensic expert testified to their authenticity, or lack thereof. His detailed explanation left no room for doubt. The signatures weren't my father's, and the dates were fabricated to give the illusion of legitimacy. Next came the security footage. As the video played on the screen, the courtroom fell silent. I couldn't bring myself to watch the screen, but I could feel the weight of the evidence pressing down on everyone in the room. When the video ended, the prosecutor turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is irrefutable proof of the defendant's actions that night. Their intentions were clear, their methods cruel. Witnesses followed, one after another, each recounting what they saw or heard that night. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to the arson and left little room for Daniel and Martha to argue their innocence. As the trial progressed, I began to feel a shift in the air. The smugness on Daniel's face started to fade, replaced by a flicker of unease. Martha's whispers grew more frantic, her composure cracking under the weight of the evidence. But the turning point came during cross-examination. The prosecutor questioned Daniel about his presence at the farmhouse that night. His responses were evasive, his usual charm failing him. When pressed further, he stumbled over his words, contradicting his earlier statements. "Mr. Daniel," the prosecutor said sharply, "isn't it true that you and your mother went to the farmhouse with the intent to claim it as your own, despite knowing the property rightfully belonged to Sarah?" Daniel hesitated, his confidence wavering. I don't recall." The prosecutor pounced. "You don't recall tying your wife to a tree? You don't recall setting fire to the house? Or do you not recall because you've been caught?" Martha, sitting beside him, muttered something under her breath, but the damage was done. The jury's eyes were fixed on Daniel, their expressions unyielding. When it was finally my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and stepped up to the stand. My hands trembled slightly, but I spoke with as much clarity as I could muster. I told the court about my father, the farmhouse, and the betrayal that had shattered my life. "They didn't just burn down a building," I said, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. "They destroyed the memories, the legacy my father worked so hard to create." But I refused to let their greed and cruelty define my story. This isn't just about property, it's about justice. As I finished, the room was silent. The jury looked at me with a mixture of empathy and respect, and I felt a small flicker of hope. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I believed I might win. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt an odd sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that justice might actually be within reach. I had done everything I could to present the truth, and now it was up to the jury to decide. The courtroom was tense as the closing arguments began. The prosecutor stood with confidence, addressing the jury directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about greed and cruelty," he said. "It's about two individuals who betrayed someone they should have protected. Daniel and Martha didn't just forge documents and commit arson, they tried to destroy Sarah's spirit. But Sarah fought back, and the evidence proves that she is telling the truth. These defendants must be held accountable for their actions." The defense attorney's closing argument, on the other hand, was weak and desperate. He tried to discredit the security footage, calling it circumstantial, and claimed the witnesses were unreliable. But the jury's expressions told me they weren't buying it. The evidence was too damning, and the lies too obvious. After the closing arguments, the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate. Those hours felt like an eternity. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clasped tightly, as Daniel and Martha whispered to each other. Martha's smugness was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. Daniel kept glancing at me, but I refused to meet his gaze. Finally, the jury returned. The room fell silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of fraud, the foreperson began. We find the defendants, Daniel Roberts and Martha Roberts, guilty. My heart raced as the foreperson continued. On the charge of arson, we find the defendants guilty. And on the charge of attempted harm, we find the defendants guilty. The words washed over me like a wave, leaving me breathless.
Guilty.
They were guilty on every count. I felt tears well up in my eyes, but I held them back. This wasn't the time for tears. This was the moment I had fought so hard for. The judge sentenced Daniel and Martha to lengthy prison terms, ensuring they wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else for a very long time. As they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Daniel looked back at me. His face was a mixture of anger and defeat. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Once they were gone, the weight on my chest began to lift. For the first time since that terrible night, I could breathe freely. The farmhouse might have been reduced to ashes, but my father's legacy wasn't gone. It lived on in my determination, in my fight for justice, and in the strength I had found within myself. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild, not just the farmhouse, but my life. With the insurance settlement and my inheritance intact, I began planning the restoration of the property. It wasn't just about rebuilding walls and roofs. It was about honoring my father and everything he stood for. The local community rallied around me, offering their support and encouragement. Neighbors who had testified during the trial became friends, and I realized that I wasn't alone. The farmhouse might have been isolated, but I wasn't. One day, as I stood on the property watching the workers lay the foundation for the new house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. My father's words echoed in my mind. When life knocks you down, get back up stronger. I had done just that. Looking back, I realized that Daniel and Martha's betrayal didn't destroy me. It transformed me. I found a strength I didn't know I had, and I learned that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about reclaiming what's yours and standing tall in the face of adversity. The farmhouse will never be the same, but it doesn't have to be. It will be a new home, a new chapter. And I will continue to honor my father's memory by living a life he would be proud of, one built on resilience, dignity, and truth. As I tell this story now, I hope it serves as a reminder to anyone facing betrayal and loss. You are stronger than you think. And even when everything seems lost, you can rise from the ashes.
I never thought a regular Saturday dinner at my parents' house would mark the beginning of such a dramatic change in our family's life. But there I was, sitting at the familiar oak dining table, when my older sister dropped the bombshell that would set everything in motion. "I've decided to sell my apartment," Amanda announced, barely containing her excitement. "We're going to open our own Italian restaurant." I nearly choked on my mashed potatoes. The apartment she was talking about wasn't just any property, it was a luxury 3-bedroom condo in the heart of the city, the one our grandmother had left her in her will. Her husband Mike nodded enthusiastically, his fork waving in the air as he spoke. "I know everything there is to know about Italian cuisine. And Amanda has restaurant experience, so we're perfectly qualified." I watched as my parents' faces lit up with admiration. Mom clasped her hands together in delight, while Dad beamed with pride. "That's such a wonderful idea, honey," Mom exclaimed. "You've always had such a good head for business." But something didn't sit right with me. Call me boring, and trust me, I've been called worse, but being a financial manager means I can't help but think about the practical side of things. "Have you actually calculated all the risks?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Maybe it would be better to take out a business loan instead of selling your only property?" Amanda rolled her eyes. "Here we go again. Classic Nellie, always overthinking everything. Do you at least have a business plan?" I pressed on, glancing at her kids, 5-year-old Tommy and 2-year-old Lisa, who were playing with their toys in the living room. "You have 2 small children to think about. If things don't work out, buying another apartment won't be easy." "Oh, please," Amanda scoffed. "You don't understand anything about business opportunities. In today's economy, you have to take risks to get ahead. You can't just sit around waiting for success to fall into your lap." But your restaurant experience. I started, remembering how she'd only worked as an administrator for a few months before Tommy was born. It was pretty brief, wasn't it? God, you're so boring. Amanda threw her hands up in exasperation. This is exactly why you're still single, Nellie. You never take any chances. I sat there, pushing the remains of my dinner around my plate, listening to them spin their fantasy of success. Not once did they mention the possibility of failure, of things going wrong. Not once did they consider what would happen if their dream restaurant didn't work out. An hour later, I pulled into the driveway of my small house, Grand's house really, though she'd been gone for 3 years now. As I unlocked the front door, my mind wandered back to her final days and how she'd divided her property between my sister and me. Amanda had practically camped out at Grand's hospital bed, going on and on about how perfect the luxury apartment would be for her future family. I remember Gran looking at me apologetically as she explained her decision to leave me the house instead. "You've always been practical, just like me," she'd said, squeezing my hand with what little strength she had left. "This house isn't fancy, but it's paid for and full of love. You'll appreciate its value more than anyone else could." Sitting in my cozy living room now, surrounded by Gran's old furniture that I couldn't bear to replace, I couldn't help but think about how history kept repeating itself with Amanda. The memory of her childhood tantrums came flooding back, the time she screamed for 2 hours straight because Mom bought her the wrong color bicycle, or when she threw herself on the floor of the mall because Dad wouldn't buy her a second pair of designer jeans. There was also that memorable Christmas when she refused to speak to anyone for 3 days because she got the previous year's iPhone model instead of the latest one. Our parents had nodded along to whatever scheme she cooked up, praising her creativity and ambition while dismissing my concerns as negativity. Even when she dropped out of college because classes were boring and she wanted to find herself, they supported her decision wholeheartedly. I made myself a cup of tea in Gran's old porcelain cup, trying to push these thoughts aside. I had my own life to focus on, my job at Henderson Financial was demanding but rewarding, and I had a major project presentation coming up that could lead to a promotion. Our team was working on restructuring a client's investment portfolio, and I needed to be sharp. Amanda's restaurant dreams weren't my problem, and dwelling on them wouldn't change anything. But exactly 1 month later, my phone rang during my lunch break, just as I was reviewing the final numbers for my presentation. Mom's name flashed on the screen, and I felt a strange sense of foreboding. "Nellie, you won't believe it," she practically squealed, her voice high with excitement. "They did it. They sold the apartment and found the perfect location for the restaurant. It's right on Madison Street, you know, where all those trendy places are. Mike is already working on the menu. He's got such wonderful ideas, fusion Italian cuisine, can you imagine? And Amanda, oh, you should see her Instagram posts about the restaurant. She's going to be such a successful businesswoman. She's already got over 1,000 followers for the restaurant page." I gripped my phone tighter, feeling my knuckles turn white. "Where are they living now?" "They found a nice rental," Mom replied breezily, as if they hadn't just sold their only real estate asset. "I'm watching Tommy and Lisa while they get everything set up. It's so exciting. They're talking about having a big grand opening party next month." I stared at the financial report on my desk, thinking about the massive risk my sister had just taken. The statistics about restaurant failures in their first year flashed through my mind. I'd looked them up after that dinner, and they weren't pretty. 2 months passed in a blur of work deadlines and quiet evenings at home before I received Amanda's message. The invitation popped up on my Instagram feed, an elaborate digital card with gold lettering announcing the grand opening of Bella Italia. I had to admit, it looked professional. When I arrived at the address on Madison Street that Saturday evening, I was actually impressed. The storefront had been transformed with elegant lighting and window boxes full of fresh herbs. Inside, the decor was warm and inviting, exposed brick walls, dark wood tables, and strings of twinkling lights crisscrossing the ceiling. "Nellie, you came." Amanda rushed over in a designer dress that probably cost more than a month's worth of rent. She air-kissed my cheeks, champagne glass wobbling in her hand. The place was packed with familiar faces, cousins, aunts, uncles, old family friends, and Mike's entire extended family. Mom and Dad were holding court near the bar, Dad's voice carrying across the room as he gestured enthusiastically. "Just wait and see," I overheard him telling Uncle Jim. "Amanda's going to be the next big name in the restaurant business. She's got that entrepreneurial spirit, you know? Not like Nellie, she'll probably work for other people until she retires." Mom nodded along. "Some people are just born leaders, and others, well, they're more comfortable following." I pretended not to hear them as I made my way to the appetizer table. Their words didn't sting as much as they might have once. I'd long ago accepted that I'd never be the daughter they bragged about at family gatherings. "Congratulations," I told Amanda sincerely, raising my glass. "The place looks beautiful. I hope it's a huge success." The next few months fell into a pattern. Every Sunday dinner at our parents' house became a progress report on Bella Italia. Amanda would sweep in, sometimes with the kids and Mike, sometimes just with Tommy and Lisa in tow, and dominate the conversation with tales of her budding restaurant empire. "That's our girl," Dad would beam. "Always knew she had it in her to be a successful entrepreneur. It's in her blood." Mom would inevitably chime in with, "Not everyone has that drive," shooting meaningful glances my way. Amanda would smirk at me across the table, that same superior look she'd had since we were kids, and she'd gotten her way yet again. But one evening, when the conversation turned to actual numbers, I couldn't help myself. "How's the revenue looking?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Are you hitting your projected targets?" Amanda's smile faltered for a split second. "Oh, you know how it is with new restaurants," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "We're still building our customer base. But we'll be self-sufficient any day now, and then the profits will really start rolling in." Something in her voice made me think of a time in high school when she'd insisted everything was fine with her grades, right up until she failed 3 classes. But I kept that thought to myself and just nodded, taking another bite of Mom's pot roast. The spring evening started like any other Sunday dinner, with Mom's cooking filling the house with familiar aromas and Dad telling his same old jokes. Then Amanda cleared her throat and grabbed Mike's hand. "We have some news," she announced, beaming. "I'm pregnant. Baby number 3 is on the way." Mom burst into tears of joy, Dad started talking about another grandchild to spoil, and Mike sat there grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Tommy and Lisa jumped around the table, chanting, "Baby, baby." I set down my fork, choosing my words carefully. "Are you sure this is the best timing? With the restaurant still getting established and everything?" The room went silent. You'd think I'd just suggested selling Tommy and Lisa to the circus. "Nellie," Mom's voice could have cut glass. "How dare you? A baby is always a blessing. Besides," she added with that particular tone she reserved for discussing my personal life, "you'd understand if you had any children of your own. Or a husband. You're 30 now, you know. Not getting any younger." 8 months later, little Emily joined the family. She was beautiful, with Amanda's blue eyes and Mike's dark hair. But while everyone was cooing over the new addition, I couldn't help but notice the strain showing around my sister's eyes, the way Mike kept checking his phone with an increasingly worried expression. The truth finally came out 3 months after Emily's birth, during another family dinner. Amanda looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes visible despite her makeup, while Mike had traded his usual confident swagger for nervous fidgeting. "We're having some challenges at the restaurant," Amanda admitted, pushing her food around her plate. The word seemed to physically pain her. "The staff turnover is killing us. We've gone through 6 different head chefs because Mike keeps wanting to innovate with the menu." She took a shaky breath. "We've had to take out a business loan just to keep things running. The numbers they're not what we projected." I sat there in silence, remembering all my questions about their business plan from that first dinner. The loan they should have taken instead of selling the apartment. The risks I'd warned them about. But I didn't say any of it. The next 6 months were like watching a slow-motion car crash. Every week brought new problems at Bella Italia. First, the lunch crowd dwindled to nothing. Then the evening reservations started to dry up. The restaurant's Instagram page, once full of beautifully plated dishes and smiling customers, went quiet. The last post was a sad 2-for-1 Tuesday promotion that got 3 likes. I heard most of it through Mom's daily phone calls to update me on the situation. How they had to let go of half the staff. How they started closing on Mondays to cut costs. How Mike got into a shouting match with their last remaining chef over putting sushi rolls on their Italian menu. They're just having a rough patch, Mom would insist. Every new business goes through this. But it wasn't just a rough patch. By spring, the writing was on the wall in bright, neon letters. The restaurant's debts had piled up like autumn leaves, unpaid suppliers, late rent, mounting tax bills. The final blow came when their main investor pulled out, leaving them with no choice but to sell Bella Italia for a fraction of what they'd invested. The sale barely covered their business debts. They still owed the bank nearly $200,000 from the loan they'd taken out. Amanda, Mike, and their 3 kids, Tommy now 8, Lisa 5, and little Emily just turning 1, were left with nothing. No home, no income, and a mountain of debt. I almost skipped the next Saturday dinner. Something in Mom's voice when she called to remind me about it set off warning bells. But I went anyway, pulling up to their house just as the spring sun was setting. The atmosphere hit me the moment I walked in. Mom and Dad sat ramrod straight in their usual chairs. Amanda and Mike were there too, the kids playing quietly in the corner, unusually subdued for them. Emily was asleep in her carrier, while Tommy and Lisa seemed to sense the tension in the room, focusing intently on their tablets. I hadn't even settled properly into my chair when Dad cleared his throat. "Nellie, we've made a decision." The way he said "we" made my stomach clench. "Your sister and her family need a place to stay," Mom jumped in. "You have that big house all to yourself." I felt like I'd walked into an ambush. "What?" "We need to move in with you," Amanda stated, as if she was telling me the weather forecast. "Temporarily, of course." My mouth went dry. How long is temporarily?" Amanda shrugged, examining her perfectly manicured nails, probably her last professional manicure for a while, I thought hysterically. "Hard to say. I can't work, obviously. Not with 3 small children to take care of. And Mike needs time to find the right position." "I'm not going to flip burgers somewhere," Mike interjected, puffing up his chest. "I was a business owner. I need something at an executive level." "So we'll need to stay with you for a few years," Amanda continued, as if discussing borrowing a cup of sugar. "It's not like you're using all that space anyway. And let's be honest, Nellie, you're not getting any younger. The chances of you getting married and having kids are getting pretty slim. You're already 30, and you spend all your time working." I sat there, stunned into silence by my sister's breathtaking arrogance. The casual cruelty of her words hung in the air like poison, made worse by our parents' nodding heads. Mom and Dad were actually agreeing with her, as if my single status and career somehow made me responsible for fixing their mistakes. I pushed my chair back and stood up, the leg scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made everyone jump. "No." "What do you mean, no?" Amanda asked, genuine confusion in her voice. The concept of me refusing her anything was apparently foreign to her. "I mean no. You're not moving into my house." My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. "Not for a few years, not for a few months, not at all." The silence that followed was deafening. I could actually hear the tick of Mom's ancient kitchen clock, marking the seconds. Tommy and Lisa looked up from their tablets, sensing the tension in the room. Even baby Emily stirred in her carrier. Then the explosion came. "How dare you?" Mom shrieked, her face turning red. "They're your family. Your own flesh and blood. You selfish, heartless witch." Amanda joined in, tears already starting to flow. "My children will be homeless because of you." Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "I never thought I raised such a cruel, uncaring daughter." These are your nephews and niece we're talking about. You've always been jealous of your sister, Mike added, wrapping an arm around my sobbing sister. You're probably happy we failed. I let them rant, watching as they worked themselves into a righteous fury. The accusations flew thick and fast. I was heartless, cruel, selfish, bitter, jealous. A terrible aunt. A disappointment as a daughter. A failure as a woman. When they finally ran out of steam, I spoke, my voice still perfectly calm. You know who could take them in? You could, Mom and Dad. Since you supported their brilliant business plans so enthusiastically. Since you cheered them on when they sold their only home. Since you told them what a wonderful idea it all was. Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Dad started to sputter something about their house being too small, but I cut him off. I warned you all, I continued, reaching for my coat. I warned you about selling the apartment. I warned you about starting a business without a proper plan. I warned you about the risks. Not one of you listened. Not one of you even considered that I might know what I was talking about. And now that everything I predicted has come true, you expect me to clean up your mess? I buttoned my coat with steady hands. You made your decisions. All of you. You chose not to listen to reason. You chose to ignore every warning sign. You chose to risk everything on a dream with no foundation. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices. I walked out into the cool evening air, closing the door on their protests. As I got into my car, I could still hear them shouting through the windows, their voices a chorus of outrage and disbelief. The harassment started within hours of me leaving my parents' house. First came the guilt trip texts from Mom, how can you sleep at night knowing your nieces and nephew might end up homeless? Then Dad's angry voicemails about family duty and responsibility. Amanda alternated between tearful pleas and vicious attacks, while Mike sent long, rambling messages about how I was destroying his children's future. I blocked their numbers after the first week, but they just switched to email. Then social media. Then they started having other family members contact me. Aunt Susan called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. Cousin Rachel sent me a 5-paragraph Facebook message about how karma would get me. Uncle Jim cornered me outside my office to lecture me about family values. I weathered it all, focusing on my work and the peace of my home. But I wasn't naive. I knew my family well enough to know they wouldn't just accept my refusal. That's why I'd called a locksmith the very next day after that disastrous dinner. The locks were changed, a security system was installed, and cameras were placed at strategic points around the house. Smart thinking, as it turned out. I was driving home from work one Wednesday evening when I saw them. Amanda, Mike, and the kids were camped out on my front porch, surrounded by suitcases and boxes. Tommy was sitting on a large duffel bag, looking bored. Lisa was crying, and Emily was fussy in her carrier. Mike was jiggling my doorknob with what I assumed was my mother's spare key. I pulled into my driveway and got out of my car, unable to suppress a laugh at the scene before me. They all turned at the sound. Something funny? Mike snarled, still trying to force the key into the lock. Actually, yes, I replied, leaning against my car. Did you really think I wouldn't change the locks after that dinner? The alarm system's nice too, it's already sent 3 notifications to my phone about attempted entry. Amanda stepped forward, her face twisted with anger. You can't just leave us out here. We're your family. You're trespassing, I corrected her. And if you don't leave immediately, I'll call the police. I pulled out my phone to demonstrate I wasn't bluffing. You wouldn't dare, Mike growled, taking a threatening step toward me. I held up my phone, showing them the 911 already dialed, my thumb hovering over the call button. Try me. They stared at me for a long moment, probably searching for any sign of weakness or uncertainty. They found none. Finally, Amanda burst into tears, real ones this time, not her usual performance, and started gathering up their things. Mike helped her, muttering threats under his breath. The kids just looked confused and tired. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I spent the day visiting rental properties in decent neighborhoods, finally finding a clean, spacious 3-bedroom apartment in a good school district. The landlord was understandably hesitant about renting to a family with 3 young kids, but the 6 months' rent I paid in advance, nearly $20,000 from my savings, helped change his mind. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house, the apartment keys feeling heavy in my pocket. It was early, but I knew they'd all be there. They always gathered for Saturday breakfast, a tradition that used to include me too. The room fell silent when I walked in. Mom nearly dropped the pancake plate, and Dad's newspaper crinkled as his hands tightened on it. "Here," I said, placing the keys and a folder on the table. "It's a 3-bedroom apartment on Cedar Street. Good neighborhood, walking distance to the elementary school. I paid 6 months' rent in advance." Amanda stared at the keys like they might bite her. Mike didn't even look up from his phone. "The lease starts today," I continued, my voice steady. "I've already talked to the landlord. He knows you have 3 kids. There's a playground in the complex, and the building has a laundry room on each floor." I turned to Mike specifically. "You have 6 months to find a job, any job. Pride doesn't pay bills or feed children. When the lease ends, you'll need to either renew it yourselves or find another place. This is the only help I'm offering." Nobody spoke. Tommy and Lisa had stopped fighting over the syrup and were watching with wide eyes. Even Emily seemed to sense the tension. Her tiny hand paused midway to her mouth with a piece of pancake. "That's it?" Amanda finally asked, her voice bitter. "You think throwing money at us makes up for turning your back on family?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The entitled teenager who always got her way had grown into an entitled adult who never learned to face consequences. "No," I replied calmly. "The money doesn't make up for anything. It's just the right thing to do. What happens next is up to you." Mom started to say something, probably another lecture about family duty, but I held up my hand. "I'm done. I helped because those kids deserve a stable home, but I'm not enabling this behavior anymore. You all made your choices. Now you have to live with them." I left without waiting for a response. As I drove home, I caught myself smiling, not because I was happy about the situation, but because for the first time in my life, I felt truly free of their expectations and manipulation. 3 months have passed since then. According to Aunt Susan, who still talks to me, albeit disapprovingly, Amanda and her family are living in the apartment I rented. Mike still hasn't found a job. Apparently, being a former restaurant owner makes him too good for regular work. Amanda spends most of her time complaining on social media about how hard her life is. Mom and Dad continue to enable them, watching the kids and bringing them groceries. I haven't spoken to any of them since that morning. I've started taking evening classes in investment management, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the emotional energy for before. Last week, I got a promotion at work, senior financial manager with my own team,